CGTN, China Global Television Network.
We bring you the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak. South Sudan rivals in last-ditch talks to resolve stalemate ahead of peace deadline. And Horn of Africa nations seek new measures to curb maritime insecurity. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program. In business news, Ethiopia approves an $877 million budget. And we bring you the latest from the 2020 African Nations Championship draw in Cameroon. We start with the latest on the coronavirus outbreak. The total number of confirmed cases in China has passed 72,000. The death toll stands at over 1,800, while more than 12,000 have recovered. The daily number of new confirmed cases in the country has fallen to less than 2,000 for the first time since the start of the outbreak. Hubei province has the majority of confirmed cases in China, nearly 60,000 so far, and 70% of them are in the provincial hospital Wuhan, where the outbreak began. Guangdong, Sichuan, and Henan provinces are the most affected areas outside Hubei, with each reporting more than 1,100 cases. Beijing has reported 387 and Shanghai 333. The virus has spread to 25 other countries, which altogether have reported more than 800 cases. Japan is the worst hit country outside China, with 1 death and 523 cases. Most of them are passengers on a quarantine cruise ship. While China has released its most detailed study about COVID-19 so far, it is based on the total cases confirmed as of February 11th. It said more than 80% of the cases had been mild and that the overall death rate is 2.3%. The World Health Organization has reviewed the paper and says it will not raise its assessment of the global risk. It also says it does not see COVID-19 as a worldwide epidemic. But it has also stressed that while a decline is being reported in China's new cases, that trend could change. Our correspondent Tony Waterman is in Geneva with more.
Well, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, said that as more information is streaming in, they're getting a clearer picture of COVID-19. The Chinese released a paper today. It had very detailed information on more than 44,000 confirmed cases of the virus. And this information helps not just the WHO, but also researchers and governments better understand the age range which is most affected, the severity of this disease, and also the mortality rate. And with that information, governments can better strategize how they are going to tackle the spread of this virus. And certainly for the WHO, it allows them to dispense very evidence-based information to different countries. The number of new cases today hit a new low, or a 3-week low, I should say. But Dr. Tedros said that that trend needs to be interpreted very cautiously. Take a listen to what he had to say.
This trend must be interpreted very cautiously. Trends can change as new populations are affected. It's too early to tell if this reported decline will continue. Every scenario is still on the table.
Well, Chinese state-owned enterprises are working around the clock to support prevention and control of the epidemic. Officials say they are producing thousands of protective suits, face masks and test kits every day to meet urgent needs and strengthening work to develop new drugs. State-owned enterprises in key industries, including petroleum, electricity, telecom, food and aviation, are also working to meet people's daily needs. And state companies have also donated over 2.5 billion yuan in large quantities of medical supplies to badly hit areas. Now, as the city of Wuhan, I beg your pardon, another Chinese medical professional has died of COVID-19. President of Wuhan Wechang Hospital, Liu Shiming, died of the disease Tuesday morning at the age of 51. His hospital is among the first designated to treat infections. Chinese authorities said as of Friday 11th that more than 1,700 medical workers had been infected and 6 had died. Well, as the city of Wuhan struggles to get the virus under control, people with serious chronic diseases have suffered in different ways. Kidney patients who rely on dialysis treatment for survival, for example, have their own difficulties. CGTN's Xu Mengqi reports.
He says the mom of a classmate has nowhere to do dialysis. He asked me whether our place can still take her, and I told him we are full too.
Wuhan No. 4 Hospital is one of a few designated coronavirus hospitals in the city that still offer dialysis treatment for non-COVID-19 patients. It took some struggle, however, to keep the service open.
The announcement was made on the 21st. The building closed on January 23rd. So within 48 hours, we hastily moved the entire dialysis room here. The beds you're seeing now were what we used to transport stuff. All these pipes were fixed at the last moment. Some hospitals only have one building, so they don't even have a place to move to. To meet the needs of isolation, dialysis has to stop.
All of these people behind me are family members of kidney failure patients who are now receiving treatment in the makeshift dialysis rooms. But not all of them are regular visitors. Some only moved here recently because the hospitals they often go to can no longer offer dialysis treatment.
Our hospital notified us that there were cross-infections among patients. Medical staff also got infected too, so they suggested that we move out.
75-year-old Han Zhixin is one of the 360 kidney patients in the hospital that get to keep their lifeline during the coronavirus outbreak. But as we learned after his dialysis treatment, they still face other problems. Han lives about 10 kilometers away from the hospital, and for the past 5 years, he has been commuting between home and the hospital by light rail, which along with other public transport was suspended. Han reached out to his residential committee for help, who then decided to give him a ride whenever he needs it.
I am really grateful to our community for driving me. Otherwise, I could not have continued the dialysis treatment.
A heartwarming moment indeed, in a time fraught with difficulties. Xu Mengqi, CGTN, Wuhan.
Now, outside China, Japan has the most confirmed cases of COVID-19, and most of them are aboard the cruise ship docked in Yokohama. Here's CGTN's Terence Terashima with the latest on the situation.
Health and Welfare Ministry since decided that they're going to test everyone. There's still about 3,200 people remaining on the cruise liner. Those people, starting from the prioritizing the people over 70s, once they're cleared the test, they can start disembarking from the 19th of February. That's the end of the 14-day quarantine period. Depending on how many people are found positive, it may spill over to the 21st.
A taxi driver in Japan has found out he's been diagnosed of COVID-19 during a live television interview. He was speaking with the network TBS on Monday when he received a phone call from a health center where he went for testing the day before. He had attended a meeting with a co-worker who later tested positive of the virus. And the TV station was interviewing him about that situation as he waited for his test results. He said he had no symptoms, so he continued working before the result came out. Hong Kong is working with the Japanese government to fly back about 350 residents stranded on the Diamond Princess cruise ship off Yokohama. 2 Cathay Pacific flights have been chartered. They are expected to return to Hong Kong on Thursday. Chief Executive Carrie Lam earlier updated the media on the latest development. CGTN's Lian Chanwa has more.
2 senior officials from Hong Kong are now in Japan to finalize the arrangements with the Japanese authorities of getting back the Hong Kong residents who are still stranded on the Japanese cruise ship. And according to the plan, 2 Cathay Pacific flights have been chartered to fly them back on Thursday. On each of the 2 flights, over 400 seats are provided and 10 volunteer crew members are assigned instead of the Euro 15. And all of them will be wearing full protective gear, and no food will be provided on the 2 flights to minimize the possibility of being infected by the novel coronavirus. When they come back, all of them will be subjected to another round of quarantine.
These Hong Kong residents on board the ship have already spent 14 days on the vessel and undergone tests. But upon returning to Hong Kong, we will require them to continue undertaking yet another 14-day enforced quarantine. And at this point, I also need to emphasize one more time that this is work that needs to be done. Because on the ship, practically every day, there are new confirmed cases.
Li Jiehua, CGTN, Hong Kong.
African countries have stepped up proactive measures and enhanced their capacity to test for the COVID-19 virus. In the last week, 10 countries have announced that they have fully equipped laboratories able to test samples of the virus. Previously, only 2 countries, Senegal and South Africa, had the capability. They served all countries in the region. The World Health Organization says it hopes that by the end of February, 36 countries on the continent will have testing equipment. It has dispatched experts to Africa to assist in surveillance and early detection. Now, early this morning, I spoke to Kenya's national broadcaster on their program, Good Morning Kenya. I spoke on China's efforts in controlling the outbreak. I also disputed claims of disregard of African students in China, stating the case of a student from Cameroon who contracted the virus in Jingshu City. That student was treated and all his medical bills paid by the Chinese government. During the interview, I urged the media to avoid circulating unverified information. Meanwhile, African governments have expressed support and confidence in China containing the virus. They've said African students in China will not be evacuated since China has the capability to handle the virus. We can tell our audiences exactly what it is, how to protect yourself, what authorities are doing to protect the population and so forth, right? But we also need to understand that we don't need to sensationalize. We don't need to do scaremongering is the word that I'm talking about. We need to rely on facts. We need to rely on research. We need to rely on scientific data. We need to rely on what the World Health Organization is telling us. We need to rely on what health authorities are telling us. Because let's take an example of the AIDS crisis in the 70s and 80s, right? When we stigmatized the people, they went underground. It is not going to affect China's domestic growth as well. And even us in Africa, we have been talking to business people. I spoke to the World Health Organization. We now have, as of this week, we have a laboratory in Ghana, Madagascar, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Ethiopia. They've also announced that they are able now to conduct the test. WHO is also sending kits to 29 laboratories on the continent to ensure they have the capacity. China is also has released some $80 million to fund a Center for Disease Control in Ethiopia to enable us to have that capacity. So when you look at, when you talk about the contacts, the people-to-people contact, anybody who comes in from China, right, already goes through thorough testing at their port of exit. At our port of entry, we already have the temperature scans in all airports across the continent, right? Because we were already testing for Ebola. So that was already in place. Now we have this added capacity that has been given to us by WHO and by the Chinese authorities. So when you look at it, really, there shouldn't be much worry that we don't really have the capacity 100%. Now, even when you talk about Kenya, right? The health ministry had indicated that they had already set up a quarantine facility in the event that anybody, was thought to have the coronavirus. In other countries as well, that has been set up. So on the continent, the capacity is building up. Even though we had concerns about the health status of weaker states, the capacity is now building up to ensure that, that we are able to deal with this. Just to point out that, yes, we have about 1.5 million Chinese tourists that visit Africa annually. We also have about 10,000 Chinese enterprises, right, that operate in the African continent. When you talk about 10,000 Chinese enterprises, they're not all shutting down. So it is business as usual on the continent when it comes to doing business with China. the Chinese government gives 50,000 scholarships to African students annually. That number has been progressively rising during every other 3 years, right? So there are thousands of African students that are in China. I'll give you the example of one Cameroonian student, the first student, that was infected with coronavirus.
Right now he's doing well.
The student was treated in China. He took himself to hospital. He was treated. He has been cured, and he is, continuing with his business in China. So in terms of, are there concerns that the African students or the African business people that are in China, that they may not be looked after? There is no validity to that concern at all, based on the situation of that one Cameroonian student, right? He went to hospital, he was treated, he recovered, he went on with his life.
So if it's possible for him, it can also be possible for many more.
Well, it is possible for everybody. The Chinese authorities are taking very keen measures to ensure that every single person is taken care of. If you feel that you have the coronavirus, or if you're detected to have the coronavirus, every single person, regardless of race, is being taken care of. And that is why they're releasing also the figures of the foreigners who have contracted the disease. So they are capable of taking care of everyone. Meanwhile, a video made by the Chinese Mauritian community has gone viral in Mauritius. It sends a message of love and support to China and Chinese people who are fighting against COVID-19 at a great cost. Let's take a look.
Bien triste, 242 mots dans la nuit.
T'imagines que ça va docteur là, infirmier, volontaire, jour et nuit malade travail pour moi.
Pas facile du tout.
Nous déjà fait.
Mais en tant que Mauricien, nous avons montré une solidarité, nous support. Nous, qui nous sommes capables de faire, nous montrer, nous là pour la Chine. Ça va être un frère.
Hey, don't worry, we are with you.
China.
Good luck, China. 中国加油！加油！
祝愿他们恢复生活，恢复健康。
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. South Sudan rivals in a last-ditch talks to resolve stalemate ahead of peace deadline. And Horn of Africa nations seek new measures to curb insecurity in the Red Sea.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Sudan's President Salva Kiir is scheduled to meet with opposition leader Riek Machar in Juba today to try and resolve the pending issues on the number and boundaries of states in the country. After a long stalemate on the issue of administrative units in the country, President Salva Kiir has reverted the country back to 10 states with 3 administrative areas. But opposition leader Riek Machar is rejecting that offer, demanding that the administrative areas be removed. For more on this, I'm now joined live by our reporter Patrick Oyet. He's joining me now from South Sudan's capital, Juba. Patrick, so what is the latest on the scheduled meeting between President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar?
Yes, Beatrice, the meeting is scheduled to take place today, as you rightly said. It has not yet begun, but officials that we talked to from the opposition group told us that the meeting is going to take place this afternoon. They are now doing consultation as a party. Also, we understand President Salva Kiir is doing his own consultation. Then the meeting will take place, of course, focusing on the issue of the 3 administrative areas. It's no longer the issue of 10 states. The issue of 10 states is okay. The opposition led by Riek Machar is saying they've welcomed it, but they have a concern on the issue of the 3 administrative areas. But they are also saying they are very hopeful. They do not want anything that will derail the peace process. They want the government formed as scheduled on 22nd of this month. So people are waiting to see what will come out of this meeting later today.
Well, Patrick, other than the scheduled meeting between the president and the opposition leader, what else is happening concerning efforts to form a unity government?
Yeah, things are happening, Beatrice. For example, there's a select committee that has been actually got from all the party signatory to the current peace agreement. The committee is now receiving nominations from all the party signatory to the agreement in as far as the issue of members of parliament, the issue of governors, and the issue of even heads of commissions are concerned, because now all these constitutional post holders will have to actually be appointed in accordance with the quotas which are provided for in the peace agreement. So they are receiving nominations from all the members that are signatories to this agreement, so that when the time for formation of the government comes, those names are ready for the government to be formed. So yes, those are some of the things that are happening here, and other parties are also continuing to consult with their members on the same. So yeah, something is happening in as much as people are waiting for the meeting between President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar.
Patrick Oyet joining me there from Juba in South Sudan. Thank you. Now, the UN mission to Libya has announced that talks will resume in Geneva between warring factions. The negotiations will take place between from February the 26th. The aim will be to negotiate a ceasefire between the UN-backed government and the eastern-based Libyan National Army, which has been leading a military campaign on Tripoli since April the 2019. The conflict has killed and injured thousands of people and forced more than 150,000 civilians to flee their homes. On to Niger now, where at least 23 people have been killed in a stampede. Officials say the incident happened as the refugees rushed to get food and clothing. Around 250,000 Nigerians live in the town of Difa, according to the United Nations. Many of them have fled attacks by Boko Haram Islamist militants and other armed groups in northeast Nigeria. Authorities in Tanzania have ordered the evacuation of 25,000 villagers who live around Nyumba ya Mungu Dam in Kilimanjaro's Mwanga district. The government says the dam is at risk of bursting after overflowing from heavy rains. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
The Mwanga district authorities have informed the public that water levels at the Nyumba ya Mungu Dam, which means House of God in Swahili, have surpassed safe levels. They say the dam is now at risk of bursting. There have been heavy rains there since the end of last year. The dam reportedly first overflowed in January. The Mwanga District Defense and Security Committee in the Kilimanjaro region has warned that failure to evacuate the danger zone around the dam will force authorities to dispatch the police to remove the villagers.
It has created some fear for citizens, but also us government officials. We have taken measures. We will generate more electricity using the national energy company, TANESCO. We believe that will help bring the levels down.
The man-made dam was constructed in the 1960s for irrigation and has been used for a hydroelectric plant with a capacity of 8 megawatts. The dam also offers a source of income to an estimated 3,500 fishermen who sell fish in about 26 villages around the dam perimeter.
We don't really know if the water will increase. If it does, it means all the people in the red zone should relocate. We're really worried, as the water has risen really high already.
Authorities continue to educate people living close to the dam on the catastrophic consequences that can be caused by a dam collapse. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Equatorial Guinea has argued that a luxury mansion in central Paris was part of its embassy. The residence was raided in 2012 by French authorities as part of a corruption investigation. The property was being used by Théodorine Obiang, the son of the president of Equatorial Guinea. The country says the residence is protected by diplomatic immunity. The case is being heard at the International Court of Justice. It is seen as a test for the limits of the 1961 Vienna Convention on diplomatic immunity, which shields government officials from prosecution abroad. Obiang was convicted last week by a French court of embezzlement of public funds and ordered to pay a $33 million fine.
Este argumento es insostenible.
Their argument is unsustainable and unacceptable. Above all, because France has refused to recognize the diplomatic status of the building under the false pretext that it belonged to the private domain in October 2011. Members of the court, the building is in the public domain.
Miembros de la Corte.
Now, faced with increasing maritime security challenges, Eastern Horn of African states are meeting to strategize on a plan of action along the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. From Mogadishu, here's CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo with more.
The two-day conference in Mogadishu is the latest in a series of meetings being conducted in member states under the regional bloc IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. Formed in April 2019, the task force on the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden composes of 3 nominees from each member state and was established pursuant to the decision of the 46th Ordinary Session of the IGAD Council of Ministers held last year. Participants meeting here hope to strategize on a regional plan of action for a region faced with multifaceted challenges, including terrorism and illegal flow of weapons.
High level of militarization of the Red Sea, in particular, both regional and international actors, visible and invisible actors, are converging on the Red Sea, and therefore this is posing a serious concern for the member state. Number 2 is illegal fishing in the Red Sea area, the Gulf of Aden, in the Indian Ocean. These are all related to each other. Then also environmental dumping of toxic waste, and therefore our concern for environmental conservation, marine conservation, is very important for this task force.
Somalia is one of the countries with the long access to both the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, and faced with increasing threats from terrorism and piracy, it hopes that the latest round of talks will ensure security and the economic interests of the region are well protected.
That the National Consultation Forum will provide an opportunity to reflect on our national and regional potential and develop a common position to protect the security and economic interests of the region, and come up with a regional plan of action that will lead to a better and merrier Horn of Africa, Red Sea and Gulf of Aden.
IGAD's top envoy to the country says that successes in creating maritime strategy in West and Southern Africa is the reason Eastern and Horn of African states must emulate.
In Africa, Africa Union maritime strategy was developed in 2014 as part of this global trend. And within the RECs, West Africa, for example, ECAS, they have developed theirs, SADC, they have developed theirs, and therefore IGAD is now involved in developing this regional plan of action as part of its maritime strategy, and in particular try to mitigate some of the problems in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden.
Officials say the talks will continue in all 7 member states until a common position to protect the security and economic interests of the region is achieved. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Tunisia has launched a national campaign to raise awareness about cancer cases among children. The campaign is part of events to mark the country's Childhood Cancer Week. And as CGTN's Adnan Chauchi reports from Tunis, the event also aims to raise support for cancer patients, survivors and their families.
The Association of Cancer Patients has invited children from many cities across the country to share their experiences in fighting cancer.
Childhood cancer is on the rise in Tunisia and the region in general. Our association provides assistance from diagnosis to treatment until the final cure.
A group of singers, musicians and painters are organizing several workshops. Artists believe that creating art helps with the physical and emotional well-being of child cancer patients.
Cancer patients are creating works of art relating to their cancers. This art project encourages patients and survivors to produce and share art about their cancer experiences. Art helps patients defeat this deadly disease.
Fatma is a nurse and a cancer survivor who is engaged in many activities with cancer patients. She encourages women, men and children to talk about their journey.
Being active in the civil society has given me hope and energy to continue the treatment. Early cancer diagnosis is important for children and adults, but the morale should remain high in order to live a normal life.
Each year, more than 300,000 children ages birth to 19 years are diagnosed with cancer around the world. Approximately 8 in 10 of these children live in low and middle income countries, where their survival rate is often near 20%. The target goal of the World Health Organization Global Childhood Cancer Initiative is to eliminate all pain and suffering of children fighting cancer and achieve at least 60% survival for all children diagnosed with cancer around the world by 2030. Tunisian health authorities have urged the civil society to contribute to fighting cancer in the North African country. Adnan Chauchi, CGTN, Tunis.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Ethiopia approves an $877 million budget. And Mike Pompeo promotes U.S. business in Angola.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out Go there and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Ethiopia's Council of Ministers has approved a supplementary budget of $877.87 million for the 2019-2020 fiscal year to finance economic reforms. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's office says the funds are to the $12.1 billion of government spending that was approved last year. $563 million will be used to deal with Ethiopia's current economic challenges. Since Abiy took office in 2018, he has embarked on ambitious economic reforms, trying to open up one of Africa's fastest growing economies. He has worked to establish policies that will open the political space, as well as efforts to privatize the telecoms, banking and sugar sectors. And still in Ethiopia, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Addis Ababa. He's expected to hold talks with Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, as well as African Union Commission's Chair Musa Faki Mahamat. CGTN's Girum Chala has the details.
When arrived on Monday night at Bole International Airport, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was welcomed by Ethiopia's Minister of Foreign Affairs Gaddu Andargacho. Pompeo is here as part of his Africa tour, bolstering commercial ties with Ethiopia as well as strengthening investment to this Eastern Africa country are some of his priority agenda items when he speaks to Ethiopian officials. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed first and President Sahle-Work Zewde later will talk to Mr. Pompeo on Tuesday. Mike Pompeo is also expected to speak at the UN's Economic Commission for Africa headquarters here in Addis Ababa on Wednesday. His main topic, peace and security in the continent. According to source, the United States wants to strengthen its ties with several African states in the fight against terrorism and extremism. Grumchala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Before heading to Ethiopia, though, the U.S. Secretary of State was in Angola on Monday. Mike Pompeo lauded Angolan President João Lourenço's anti-corruption drive. The Trump administration is seeking to revitalize its relations with Africa, as Beryl Oro reports.
You will have the heavy ore in the water.
The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was touting American business in Angola as the world's biggest economy battles rival superpower China for economic influence on the African continent.
We'll do our part to help the Angolans achieve prosperity.
Angola is sub-Saharan Africa's third largest economy and second largest oil producer. U.S. corporations such as ExxonMobil and Chevron have significant stakes there. But despite these investments, the bulk of Angola's oil is destined for China, which also holds the lion's share of Angola's foreign debt. The Trump administration accuses China of predatory lending in Africa, where Beijing has loaned governments billions of dollars in exchange for access to natural resources. But some African governments question Donald Trump's own commitment to the continent. The White House last month tightened visa restrictions on nationals from Sudan, Tanzania, Eritrea and Nigeria, and West African governments are also worried about a proposed U.S. troop withdrawal from the region just as Islamist militants are gaining ground. Pompeo told reporters that the U.S. needs to, quote, get security right here in order to enable economic growth.
Corruption is the enemy of nations' growth and progress.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was also keen to denounce corruption. Angola is ranked as one of the world's most corrupt nations, although it has seen a crackdown against graft since President João Lourenço took office in 2017. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
The ratings agency Moody's has cut its 2020 growth forecast for South Africa to 0.7%. That's down from a September forecast of 1.5%. The agency says the South African economy remains stuck in low gear due to weakened domestic private sector demand. Moody's also attributed the revised forecast to the detrimental impact of widespread power outages on the manufacturing and mining activity. The ratings agency left South Africa on the brink of junk status in November last year after it revised the outlook on the country's last investment-grade credit rating to negative. Moody's is the last of the major international agencies to keep an investment-grade rating on South Africa and is scheduled to review that assessment in March. Now, as China tries to find a way to curtail the coronavirus outbreak, the infection rate outside the country is just a fraction of the total. But the impact on global supply chains could be much greater, particularly in Latin America, where China is the second largest.
The impact of the novel coronavirus is having a ripple effect on the economy in Latin America. Take a look at Chile, which sells about a third of its exports to China. Chile leads the world in copper mine production. Large shipments to China are being disrupted because of the virus. Meanwhile, perishable products have taken a much bigger hit, according to a law firm that represents fruit exporters.
There are two principal problems. The transportation of the product and the delays, on taking it from the exporter to the final consumer, and the low prices of those products in the market.
About 20% of fruit imports, particularly cherries and grapes, popular for Chinese New Year celebrations, were held up. China's growing demand has made it a crucial market for Chile and Peru in recent years. Here in Peru, there's still optimism that it can escape the worst of the commercial fallout caused by the coronavirus. But it too has a burgeoning fresh produce sector, and avocados in particular are due for export to China beginning next month. Peru exported more than $260 million of fresh produce to China in 2019, mostly grapes, then blueberries, but also some $34 million worth of avocados. Luckily for Peru, China imported most of its grapes last year. Even so, internal demand in China has dropped by half since the outbreak. Last week, Peru suspended fish exports to China, but the country's ambassador to Peru, Liang Yu, said the worst was over.
I believe we are about to reach a turning point, and the impact of this epidemic in China will be in the short term. It will mainly impact tourism and transport, but in the long term, the economy won't be seriously affected, especially as consumer demand is accumulating. After the epidemic, growth will be much faster, which will compensate for the previous losses.
He's optimistic about commerce with Peru.
As for trade between China and Peru, I don't believe it will be affected because the accumulated demand will surge throughout the rest of the year. Imports of copper and other typical products like Peruvian fruit will remain constant and have normal growth.
But experts don't believe that Peru and other Latin American economies are out of danger yet. Peru is principally a mining country and the biggest copper producer after Chile and China.
What happens in China affects not just the quantity of mineral or fish products it imports, but also the prices, because when the Chinese buying is reduced, the prices drop. So that is a major problem for Peru, as some 90 to 95% of its exports are minerals.
For Peru, Uruguay, Chile and Brazil, China is their top importer. But the Asian giant is also a huge investor across the region. That investment is bound to slow, say experts, amid the uncertainty around the coronavirus. And after a year of slow growth in the region, economic forecasts have been trimmed further. Dan Collins, CGTN, Lima.
A fall in Chinese tourists and a drop in output from production centers in China due to the epidemic are impacting France's retail sector. Visitors from China are some of the biggest spending tourists in France, where high-end fashion has taken a hit, as Ross Cullen reports.
When it comes to luxury fashion, there is nowhere quite like France, and in particular, Paris. The luxury sector is especially attractive to Chinese tourists. 2 million come to France each year, spending more than $4 billion. But the sector is experiencing trouble with the outbreak of the coronavirus.
Everything happening right now due to the coronavirus will have an impact inside and outside China. Chinese outlets will be closed as some areas are under quarantine. It will impact the rest of the world because Chinese people won't be traveling, so there will be a significant decrease in the purchases of luxury goods in the following months.
Chinese people represent 35% of global consumers of luxury goods. Half of those purchases are made in China, the other half overseas, in places like Paris.
These are big companies, globally successful fashion firms. They're used to the more regular ups and downs of the market, but something unpredictable, like a public health emergency, can apply unexpected pressures to brands.
But there is one brighter spot for the luxury industry. The online sector is on the increase.
Of course, today, like the coronavirus is really impacting all the businesses. And especially like the retail, physical retail is deeply impacted. So that's why now today Chinese still have the habit to shop online, and even more today.
The Chinese spend more than the average overseas shopper in France. Retailers are hoping the impact of the coronavirus wears off ahead of the summer tourist season. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Stay with us here on the program as is still ahead. Meet a Mozambican hairdresser tackling a fear of dreadlocks.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A Mozambican man has made inroads into a formerly female-dominated industry. Kadino Chipanga ventured into hairdressing 20 years ago and has no regrets. Let's take a look.
The hair and beauty industry is widely viewed as a female occupation. While this is in part true, the number of men shaping the industry has been on the rise over the years. Kadino Chipanga is a great example. Roughly 2 decades ago, the Mozambican decided to become a hairdresser. But it wasn't all easy, since the art is often seen as a taboo in his country.
The idea was to create a salon whose focus was to tend on natural hair at the time when no one cared about it anymore.
The hair master, as he is popularly known as, focuses mainly on dreadlocks. Chipanga's goal is to inspire people with chemically relaxed hair to join the trend.
I started this hairstyle of dreadlocks because of Carapina's salon. I think other neighborhoods around here need to have a Rastafarian salon. Chipanga should open salons in other places.
Dreadlocks or locks are worn for various reasons. They are particularly associated with the Rastafarian movement. However, some African communities here in Mozambique have been slow to embrace that culture.
It's true, in old times when we saw a person with dreads, we thought they were strange. They looked like strange people to us. But after time, we realized that they were normal people like us. And now we also make dreadlocks.
Chipanga owns 3 salons in the capital, Maputo. He's also the owner of a range of hair products, including this shampoo, made from a plant called the devil's thorn.
This product is used at the salon and by many people. We have a distributor here in Maputo called Mozambique Trade. So, from here, the products are taken to supermarkets, gift shops, and other hair salons. The products are also available in provinces. We slowly want to spread into the international market.
Today, there are thousands of men working as hairdressers across the globe in the quest to make an impact. But for Chipanga, all that's evident for him is to become the best he can be. Uchiro Koronkwo, CGTN.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. We'll bring you the latest from the 2020 African Nations Championship draw in Cameroon.